First Thessalonians chapter 2. We'll start with verse 4 just to get a little bit of background. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, who tests our hearts. For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak for covetousness, God is witness, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. You remember from last week, the main theme was taken from verse 4, not as pleasing men, but God. That it's all about pleasing God. That's what we're doing. That we're giving our lives over to Him. We're saying, God, I just want to be pleasing to you. And without God, it's impossible, or without faith, it's impossible to please God. So really what this comes down to is just saying, Lord, I'm believing you. And when you call me and I say, here I am, no matter what the venture is, even if it's a time of testing, that here I am. And when you look through the Bible and look at that phrase, like many of us have computers now that have a concordance that enables us to be able to search by a phrase throughout the Bible and look up, here I am. And it means a time of testing, but it also means a time of God calling and somebody saying, here I am, and being willing to go wherever God leads them. One example of this, of course, from our Genesis study was Joseph. That Jacob said, hey, Joseph, and he says, here I am. And it was awesome, 17 years old. And that was the beginning of, you could say, the calamity of Joseph, because Jacob told him, go on up to Shechem, go find your brothers, find out what they're doing. And so Joseph, that's what happened. He began there with the here I am. He goes up to Shechem. His brothers first are going to kill him, but they said, no, why kill him? Let's throw him into a pit. We'll sell him. And he sells him into slavery, goes down to Egypt, and you know the story from there. He's not only in Egypt, but then from being enslaved in Egypt, he ends up being falsely accused, ends up in jail or in prison. And then the Lord, through just a work of prophecy and a vision, brings him out of this place and makes him literally the prime minister, the vice pharaoh of Egypt. And it's an amazing thing. Now, depending upon where you're looking at this, in time you could say this is terrible. Oh, it gets even worse. It's horrible. Or it gets even better. Now he's prime minister. And not only that, but that from there, he brings his whole family and saves his whole family by bringing them to Egypt, where they're there for 400 years, and then later on brought back into the promised land. So here I am, it really is a statement that gets us along this line of, Lord, I just want to be pleasing to you. I want to walk by faith and not by sight. And we just present ourselves before God, willing to go where he would have us. So, not as pleasing men, but God, it says in verse 4, for neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor as a cloak for covetousness. God is witness. So, Paul didn't come on the scene to flatter. He's not trying to win people to the Lord by flattery or as a cloak for covetousness. In other words, he's not trying to be nice to them in order to get something from them. You remember talking about that a little bit last week. It's for us guys, if somebody comes to us and starts to flatter us and, tell us how good looking we are or how nice we are or all of these things, we need to be very careful, because it might be a cloak, it might be a covering for wanting something from us. And likewise, you ladies know this probably more than us guys. Us guys are kind of dumb about this, but I think about, women in general who are always being literally like hit upon by people. And, you hear a guy who says, hey, good looking, how are you? Gorgeous. They're not just flattering you because of the out there. There's something else. It's a cloak for covetousness. Be very careful. Be very, very careful. You ladies are already pretty careful in this respect. That's why I spoke more to the guys, because the guys are just, what? She says, I'm cute. Remember from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? I'm cute, I'm cute. He goes flying off, you know. So, no, it's a deceitful female doe that's trying to talk to, what's her name? Not Felicia. Is it Felicia? Just watch out for those does. Anyway, so the point is he didn't come to try to flatter or to try to get anything from them, nor did he seek the glory from men, but even when he could have made demands as apostles, as some other apostles do, he could have said, hey, I'm an apostle, now it's time for you to take care of me, I'm going to take care of you, but you need to take care of me. They didn't do that. And so this is where we pick up in verse 7. But we were gentle among you, as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, so affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you have become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, laboring night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preached to you the gospel of God. Your witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we've behaved ourselves among you who believe, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Now this is an interesting set of paragraphs here, because Paul gives an overview of the manner in which he ministered to those who were in Thessalonica, excuse me. And with that, he uses the example that you see for families. He talks about, I was like a mother to you, I was like a brother to you, and I was like a father to you. And so we can see how this can apply for us, the manner in which we can adopt these things toward other people, as Paul did in the ministry. But we can also see what the roles are, which I think is just great. You see what the roles are of a dad and a mom and a brother. So the generalized roles of how we're supposed to conduct ourselves within a family, and how we're supposed to conduct ourselves if we are dads, or if we are moms, or if we are brothers to others, if we have siblings. And so I really like this from that dual perspective. Now Paul again is saying this is how we were. The intent here is that he was like family to them, and that they were like family to him, and that he related to them on that basis. He didn't come in and say, okay, everyone get everything in order, I'm the apostle, and because I'm the apostle, you guys need to get it together and start honoring me as an apostle, and start doing things for me as an apostle, and sit up straight because I'm an apostle, and so on. Sometimes pastors can be that way. Pastors can make certain demands. Well, the pastor's in the house, and so he can have an attitude or a response toward other people that forces people to sort of get in line. Sometimes you'll have pastors that put people on the spot. They'll go right up to them and put them on the spot and make them feel very uncomfortable. But isn't it interesting that when you start talking about a mom or a dad or a brother, there's not really any discomfort there, is there? When we're all like seated around a table together, it's sort of relaxing. It's nice, even if there's some difficult things that need to be discussed or talked about. So Paul is saying, but we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become so dear to us. So from verses 7 and 8, we see some things that are happening here. Gentleness, cherishing, affection. That there's this sort of attitude that he was toward them. Now, I'm not saying that we as guys can be gentle, and we can cherish, and we can be affectionate without being effeminate. Sometimes there's this understanding that if I'm going to do any of those things, then I'm kind of being girly. No, you can be this in a masculine way. You just don't have to act like a woman when you do it. Paul, I think, was an example of this. He didn't come in and he wasn't like Richard Simmons trying to, be, cherishing and affectionate. And some of you don't even know who Richard Simmons is. But so I'm dating myself there. Okay, so whatever. I won't talk about any new or more current people. But the fact is that we can see guys when they're being effeminate, as opposed to a guy who's just being gentle, or somebody who's trying to be overly gentle in an effeminate way. It's not what Paul was, but he was coming on the scene and he was saying, this is how I was to you. This is how we were to you. That we were gentle among you, and we cherished you as our own children. In other words, there was this protection that sort of came. He was looking out for them. He was concerned for them. And also affectionately longing for you, for we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but our own lives. And that sort of gives us maybe sort of a definition, you could say, of what affection is. That it's not one of just teaching, but it's one of relating and giving of your own life, and this dearness, endearing yourself to these other people. And that's what Paul was. But what I think is interesting is that this is what the overwhelming characteristic or trait should be of moms, specifically nursing moms. That if you see a nursing mom or a mom in general that's not gentle, or if you are a nursing mom or a mom in general who's not gentle, then you can kind of look at this and say, wow, maybe there's something else going on, that I'm getting a little bit out of line here. I'm not being gentle. I'm being harsh. Why is that? Is it that I'm not really trusting God for certain things, so as a result I have to force my way through and force things to happen? That's frequently what causes us to not be gentle. If we're at peace, we're not worried about those things. But if we're worried, if we're anxious, if we're concerned that God's not going to do it, so I better do it, so that gentleness turns into force. And so, as a mom, think about if you're gentle. Do you have an attitude that's nursing? Where you're nursing, where you're drawing people to yourself in order for them to be close and for them to be nurtured. Even as a pastor, and I believe that Paul understood this, that he was from the perspective that, I can teach from afar, but as an apostle, as a pastor, as somebody that's going to be like a nursing mother, really the ministry needs to take place close. It needs to take place in a manner which is not standoffish, but that's drawing close. And sad to say, there are, sometimes there's moms that are like this, that they're just not, they don't have a nursing heart and a nursing attitude. The baby's crying. What's your problem? I fed you, I changed you, what's your problem? Right? And sometimes we could get to that where we're exhausted and so on. And this is dads and moms, but the bottom line is that truly a mom who has the heart of a mom is one who is there and she's nursing and looking to nurture and cherish, and the baby's crying, and even if nobody else can help, and even if she can't help, she's still there to say, bring him to me, bring her to me. And she'll care for that child. And sometimes people are like that. And this is where Paul, going into the idea of Paul, sometimes people are just, they're colicky. They're adult, but they're colicky. They're acting like children. There's something that's just not right. It's just like, I changed your diaper, but it might be too tight. There might be something else that's going wrong. They might be thirsty. And they're trying to communicate this, and then the attitude is just like, well, just deal with it. Just cry. Sad to say. But a lot of the attitude, even having to do with raising children and babies, is just put them in the room and let them cry. They'll get over it. Yeah, they'll get over it. They'll learn how to be detached. And they'll seek to find something else that's familiar to them in order to calm them. or they'll just cry and then they'll feel detached. And we want our kids to be attached. This is the example, the biblical example. I'm the vine, you're the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. If we want our kids to bear much fruit, then we need to adopt the mindset or the attitude that God has given to us about abiding with us and us abiding with him. It's attached, it's close, it's together. It's not, oh gosh, they're just so cranky. Just throw them in a room and let them cry. Deal with it. And then we wonder why they don't have the fruit that we want in their lives. We wonder why they're detached. We wonder why they're not listening to us, why they don't receive our counsel. Now, this is the nursing aspect of a mom, and yet this can be adopted by brothers and dads. It can be adopted by people where we have this attitude of, if there's a problem and they're having an issue, that maybe we haven't figured it out yet, but that doesn't mean that the issue's gone. We don't just ignore it. And with people, it's the same way. Sometimes people just have issues. And sometimes we just like to say, I'm done with you. Just go in the room and cry it out. Deal with it. But that's not ministry. That's not the ministry of a nursing mom. And it's not the ministry of Paul. And I don't believe it's the ministry for us as believers, toward not only our children, but toward one another. So, he was gentle. They were gentle, just as a nursing mother, cherishing her own children. It wasn't like, that's not even my kid. It's not even mine. Okay, I'll be nice to my own grandkids and my own children, but, God forbid you bring some kid that's not a blood relative. I'm not going to be nice to him. And the same thing is true with regard to people who, maybe they grew up in Catholicism, and as a pastor, or not only that, they're atheists. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Who cares about them? They're not my blood. They're not the same blood, and you have an attitude toward them. Maybe they're part of a cult or whatever. And so there's this cherishing, and that there's an affectionate longing for you. We were pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but our lives, because you have become dear to us. So that's sort of the attitude of nursing moms or moms in general. Affection, cherishing, dearness, or to be endeared to nurse, to be gentle. But then in verse 9 it goes on, and we see something else. It says, but you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, by laboring night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preached to you the gospel of God. So here Paul talks about what his relationship was to them, but then in verse 9 he begins to say, but remember, brethren, that we labored and we toiled, that we labored night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preached to you the gospel of God. That their attitude toward their brethren was, look, we know that you've got stuff that you've got to carry, and so we'll carry our own load. Everybody's going to carry their own load. Paul later on says, if you don't work, you don't eat. I like the fact, Rob here's talking about he's got a job and then he's got another 2 jobs lined up. It's okay. That's good. And it's it's this attitude where you're working, where you're industrious, where you're carrying your own load, where you're out there trying to do and accomplish what God would have you to do and accomplish. And it isn't to pull from other people or have that expectation of the brothers carrying you. And so here he says, look, you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, that they labored and they toiled. In other words, the work was hard. And they did it night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach to you the gospel of God. Now, it doesn't really matter what the job is or what you're doing. It comes down to, are you busy about that business and that work? Are you laboring and toiling? Is it night and day? Is it stuff that you're involved in where, this is work and, you're involved. You're doing it. And Paul said this is with regard to those in Thessalonica. He said, look, we didn't come in to be a burden upon you. Now, there is a point where you can be a burden upon people, and it's okay. I mean, if you've got people that are, widows, okay, that's not really being a burden. They're not going around saying, hey, take care of me, but it's where we go and we try to help, and we assume, or we take that burden upon ourselves to serve and minister in that way. So we look out for them. And then even if our moms and dads aren't widows, but if they're older, we look out for them. We try to help. It's just a matter of honoring, and it's just how we do this. And this is what Paul's attitude was. He didn't come on the scene and say, okay, I'm here, yeah, I'll teach, but this is what my wage is, this is what my expectations are, and so on. Remember one time hearing this, and I understood where these people were coming from, and I understood where the minister was coming from. But in music, in other positions of entertainment, if we were to have a band or musicians, that's one and the same. If you were to have speakers, political speakers come out, let's say we had, I don't know, just think of somebody who's secular but who would come speak. That generally you pay their way, you cover their hotel, and you don't fly them in baggage. Okay, they're usually in first class is what the deal is. Now sometimes they have what's called a rider, and the bands have this too, where they say, okay, this is what all needs to happen. These instruments need to be put out, this level of catering, these particular things need to be out there, filet mignon, kosher, vegan food. I thought of kosher because we saw this recipe for carnitas. Do you know what carnitas are? It's pork that, carnitas is just like little meat, that's what it means. But it's pork that is marinated, and then sometimes it's cooked in an oven, but most times the best, I think, is when they take it and they deep fry it in lard. It's delicious. But this particular recipe, the way to make it was you took the pork and then you put pepper on it and kosher salt. And I thought, well, that's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? Why is kosher salt so important with pork? Anyway, how did I get to this? Catering. So on the riders, you just lay out everything, and then you say, hey, and if I am going to be flown in, I'm flying in first class. So whoever is sponsoring or hosting has to come up with all of this and fly them in that manner. And sometimes that takes place in ministry. You'll have certain bands that come in to churches, or you'll have certain speakers, and they'll have a rider, because that's just what you do. And they'll demand that they come and go on first class, and that they have a car rental, or that they're picked up in a certain type of car. They're not picked up in, some Isuzu Rodeo from 1995 or something like that, but that they're picked up in, a nice vehicle. So they have this. But within the church, when we hear about that, it's sort of like, what's up with that, right? We have a little bit of an attitude about that. And rightly so. It's understood from both standpoints. Paul is saying that when I came on the scene, I didn't have all of this stuff. When I visited you, I didn't have all these expectations, all of these things that you needed to do in order to serve me. But he was a brother. And a brother is the sort of person that's just like, yeah, we're brothers, brother and sister. If any of us have siblings, we understand what that is. There's no pretense there. But there is the expectation if you're ever doing a job. So we had to move a mattress this week. And when we moved a mattress, I had Zach, Ted, and Marshall. Had Marshall come on over. And you know what? If somebody wasn't carrying their load, they heard about it. They heard about it. They were the most gracious with me. But among themselves, there was no, come on, grab that thing. Quit goofing around. Quit slacking, right? But then afterward, it was just fine. There was no problem, but there was the expectation that everybody is on board together. And Paul came in, and he said, look, I'm not going to make any expectation upon you. I'm not going to be a burden to you, but I'm going to be a brother to you. And so if we're a brother or a sibling, just in Christ, this is what the attitude should be. And if someone says, hey man, quit slacking, we shouldn't get offended. I remember we had one church cleaning day here. And most of the people were inside, but there was some outside work that needed to happen. Okay, so the ladies, most of them, they were working and they were sweaty, and we didn't get close enough to see if they were smelly, but we knew that they were working, and they were working. So I noticed that there were a couple guys missing. So I thought, well, let me see what's going on. So I went on outside, and they were supposed to be pulling the weeds out in the parking lot. But they weren't doing that. They were just standing around talking. They were talking about, I don't know, end times theology or something. But now is not the time for end times theology. Now is the time to be pulling weeds. And I remember saying, guys, get to work. We got 3 hours here. 3 hours. And we do this maybe once a year. Perhaps twice a year, but at least once a year, maybe. And they're outside talking theology about the return of Jesus. And I'm all with them talking about the return of Jesus, but not now. They're supposed to be pulling weeds. And I remember when I said something to them, they got all upset. They got all offended. Oh, pastor telling us what to do, telling us to pull weeds. So then they made accusations at me like I was trying to be authoritative toward them. No, I'm your brother, and I'm working, and your sisters are working, and you guys are out here goofing around. Get to work. And yeah, be nice if they would have come back to church after that, but it wasn't that bad. They did. So the point is that there's this brotherly labor attitude where, everybody's together. And then notice what it says. You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we have behaved ourselves among you who believe. So you're witnesses. You've seen how we've been. We've been devout, sincere, we've been just, and we've been blameless in how we behaved. That in and of itself, brothers, sisters, are we sincere? Are we devout? Are you serious about who you are in the Lord and who Jesus is in your life? Is this just something that, translates only for the moment, or does it translate throughout our entire week and our entire month and so on? That there's this devoutness and just, that you're concerned about things being just and right. This thing as it related with the Supreme Court to Calvary Chapel, yeah, that's another Calvary Chapel, about our size, a little bigger church, out there in the desert. But when I heard that, it just made me mad because it was unjust. And do we look at these things and then just start to make new rules about what's just and what isn't just? Do we know how to define justice? Do we have that measuring rod to say that this is right or this is wrong? Is there some standard that we go by? I think of Bible interpretation as being like tape measures. There's an international standard that we can find for how long or what the distance of 1 foot is, or what the distance of 1 millimeter, if we want to go in that metric system. But if we're going to stay imperial, okay? So we're going to say what the distance of 1 foot is and what 1 yard is, and subsequent to that, what those distances are. There's a standard for that. I believe the original standard was an actual metal piece that's made out of, some type of material that doesn't expand or contract. But now I believe it's based upon light or something from that standpoint, the amount of waves and the distance on light waves, or something along that line. The point is that there's a standard to know exactly what it is. But you and I, we just have tape measures, right? We have one that's from Stanley, and then we have a Craftsman one, and then we have something that's just made from, you don't even know where it is. It's probably made in China, where they're on a metric system, so you're not even sure that the standard's right. But for the most part, we find that a foot is about a foot. And I can take your tape measure it next to mine, and even with all the printing errors and the differences of marking all that stuff out, a foot is pretty close to a foot. That's how Bible interpretation is. That we can all come to it and we can settle that, yeah, this is pretty much what it says. This is pretty much it. Now, you could get some people that go all whacked and say that, this is what that means, and it's clear they're using some other measuring system. They don't have the understanding for justice or for the interpretation of what the Word of God says. They're going off based upon something that they just want to go off of. Much like saying, hey, yeah, that's my property line. It's right about there because that's where I've got my stuff, and that's where I've got my shed, and that's where I've got all my things, right? And then you find out that, some surveyor comes out and you've got a building that's a foot into the other property, and you can sue them and say that needs to be moved back or torn down because that's on my property line. Now, for the person that's interested in justice, they say, you know what, I was wrong, and you're right. It's on your property, and I don't have any rights to that. But you've got other people that just, they'll go on their own measuring system and go in this manner and just make up their own rules. But Paul and the people that were with him, they had an attitude, they had a perspective that they were devout and that they were just. They looked to the Word of God to see what it said, and that they made their decisions and they were governed based upon what justice was. And the thing that took place in Nevada, and the thing that should scare us, or that's probably not the right word, but the thing that is so alarming to us is that the Constitution and the First Amendment that we thought was so rock solid is now in question. It's not supported. You could have it there, but if you have 5 justices out of 4, or 5 out of 9, 5 versus 4, who are saying, no, that's not a violation. That's like going to the surveyor and having a property on the other side and him saying, yeah, I know that what it says here, but we're just not going to recognize it. We don't really like you. We don't agree with what your beliefs are. So as a result, it stays. The justices who voted in favor of this, to my knowledge, now maybe this has changed, but they didn't even give a responding opinion about why they voted the way they did. This is like the surveyor saying, this is how it is. I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong, but the bottom line is majority rules. So it strikes at the very foundation. When you start to look at the Word of God, or that you're unjust, it strikes at the very foundation of what right and wrong is and how things are governed and so on. That's what's happening in the world. That's what's happening now in the United States. Thankfully, that doesn't happen with God, because His international or universal standard is set. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. That is set. And so what defines righteousness and sin will always be set. It will always be defined. It will not change. And so we can have our faith and our hope in that, even when something that we thought was rock solid, like the Supreme Court and the Constitution of the United States, that could never be shaken. Well, yeah, it can be. We've just been shown it can be. It can be fixed? Yes. It can be fixed. Yes. Yes. It can totally be remedied. But the fact is that we now have a precedent that's in place where we can know that people could be against these things, but now we've seen it actually happen in a ruling, and it's set a precedent at the highest level for the undermining. More than Roe v. Wade, more than prayer in the schools being abolished, all of that. More than Homeland Security, when we were all afraid, and then now we have cameras and everything spying on us and everything knowing every move that we make. So they were devout, they were just, and they were blameless in how they behaved among you or they that believed. And then notice it says, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father does his own children, that you walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. So verse 10, it could be tied into the attitudes that we have with brethren, to be devout, just, and blameless, but it's also the counsel that comes from a dad. And this is where Paul says, and this is how I was among you. I was like a dad. I represented this to you, and I was this to you. Because it would be hypocrisy to represent it, but not be it, right? So this is what he was. This is what it comes down to as a dad. Is there a consistency with respect to who I am toward my children? Or do they see somebody who says one thing and does another thing? You know, hey, you better go to church, learn some stuff. You gonna join us, Pop? No. Had a bad experience at church. So you hear these types of things. You hear about being just and devout and blameless, but if you're not, then there's a problem. So if we were to look at the characteristics of a dad, of a father, we see how it starts, the foundation is to be devout, or to be sincere, to be just, to be blameless, to behave yourself among those who believe. And then it says, as you know how if you're not those first four things, devout, just, blameless, and with good behavior, then when it comes time in verse 11 to exhort, comfort, and charge, as a father does his own children, they won't receive it if those first four things aren't in place. It's not going to happen. They're not going to, they might receive it if you drop the hammer on them and say, you're going to do this, and that's where you have the dictatorial attitudes in the house and, just problems. But if you're these first four things, devout, just, blameless, and behaved, then what'll you do? You'll exhort, you'll urge, you'll say to people, hey, keep going, don't give up. Come on, you're a believer, you're a Christian. God loves you. You urge them forward. Be courageous. Stand up. Do it. Face those battles. Like I said, adapt. Overcome. You have that sort of position as a father to say this sort of thing. You urge them. You encourage them. You exhort them. And then what else? And to comfort. It's the idea of saying, you know what? Now, comfort, we can say, well, what does that mean? It means to support, to come alongside, say, I'm with you. I'm with you. You might fail, you might make a mistake, but I'm with you. I'm comforting you, I'm supporting you. Take a chance. Take a step of faith. You'll be okay. It might work out horribly for you. It might even work out so horribly for you that it has implications that affect our household. But take a chance on it. Know that I'm supporting you, and I'm trusting as a brother that the decision you're making is devout and blameless and well behaved. It's a measured, or it's a wise decision. That it's just. And then what else? And charged every one of you as a father. So what does it mean to charge? It means to bring correction. Say, yeah, you know what? You're off track here. I'm going to charge you here. You're off track. Get on track. But isn't that what we kind of expect from dads? And especially if there are these first four things, that if we're going offline and they say, hey, you need to get back in line. But you get back in line, and they're saying that because they're supported and because that exhortation, they know that it's coming from an attitude of urging, not out of controlling. But it's like, man, you're making a mistake here. But I'm urging you, I'm encouraging you to make the right decision here. And I'm supporting you in it. And sometimes kids make wrong decisions. Sometimes people in church make wrong decisions. But it's where we're still with them. And then we have these other things. Okay, you made a wrong decision, and now I'm going to join you in the work. And I'm going to be somebody who's going to be gentle among you, and I'm going to be affectionate. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to sort of nurse you back to it. But just generally, if we're guys who are, have children or just older men, then we should be practicing devoutness, justice, blamelessness, and a right behavior. This is what the characteristics are of an elder in the Bible. And somebody who exhorts, well, I don't really like confrontation. Get over it. You need to learn to do this. Man up. That's what it's about. But man up not in a dictatorial way, but in a manner that says, I know that I may have to confront somebody with an exhortation or with a charge. But that's what it's about, being an elder. That's what it's about. So we need to man up to these things and start being that. Quit being cowardly. Quit being scaredy cats. Quit being, gutless, fearful. But to get on track and to start saying, okay, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And these people that I'm interacting with, that God wants me to be an elder to, it's okay. I'm not going to be mean-spirited, but I'm going to be firm, as a dad should be. Why? Verse 12, and we'll close on this. That you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. That's what a dad wants. That's what an elder wants. I just want you to walk worthy of God, to enter into his kingdom, to walk into his courts with praise, to have an attitude that just says, I made it. And there are so many people that encouraged me and exhorted me and charged me along the way, because I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to be teachable, and where we get to that, where we recognize this ourselves, but that we see that that's our job, guys. That's our job.